Alpha King Wulfric Bloodmere announced his chosen Luna before 500 witnesses, not after rejecting his true mate, not after breaking their bond, not after a single private word of warning. Arya Stonemarrow was still standing 3 feet away when he said another woman's name. She did not cry. She did not reach for the moonstone at her throat. She simply turned her eyes to him, steady, quiet, and heavier than any grief. And in that single look, she gave him something he would spend months trying to forget, the truth of what he had just done. And now, we begin. The Blood Moon ceremony was the most sacred night in the Wolf territories. It happened once a year, when the moon hung full and red above the Bloodmere stronghold, swollen and ancient, the color of old promises. 500 pack members gathered in the great hall, dressed in their finest. Warriors stood tall in ceremonial armor. Elders wore their deep silver robes. The servant families sat along the outer benches in quiet rows, children pressed between them, eyes wide with the kind of wonder that only the very young still carry into sacred spaces. At the center of it all, the Alpha King stood on the raised stone platform where every leader of the Bloodmere pack had stood before him. Fires burned in iron brackets along every wall, and the drums, the great ceremonial drums, rolled low and slow beneath everything, the way a heartbeat does when a moment is building towards something it cannot take back. Arya Stonemarrow stood 3 feet to Wulfric's left. She wore deep green, the color of the healing clans. The moonstone pendant at her throat caught the firelight and held it the same pendant Wulfric had placed around her neck on the night the mate bond first sang between them 2 years ago. In this same hall, in front of far fewer people. She had never taken it off, not once. Not even on the nights when something cold and strange had begun to grow between them, nights when Wulfric's gaze started drifting toward the far end of the table, where Maelora Vanthorpe laughed too easily and reached for his sleeve whenever she wanted his attention. Arya had noticed. She was not the kind of woman who missed things, but she had also been the kind of woman who believed in her mate, who believed that a man who had looked at her the way Wulfric once had was not capable of turning that look off like a lamp being extinguished. She had believed quietly, firmly, the way she believed in everything, that the bond between true mates was not something a single season of distraction could undo. She had been generous in that belief, perhaps too generous. Now the drums slowed. The hall went quiet the way it only does when something important is about to happen or something terrible. Wulfric stepped forward on the stone platform. His beta, Renwick Ashgrove, stood at his right with a goblet raised, face composed in the neutral mask he wore at formal occasions. Elder Orvin Christmore, the oldest and most respected neutral voice in the Wolf territories, sat in his carved chair along the front wall, silver robes folded, silver eyes still. Wulfric cleared his throat, and then he said Maelora Vanthorpe's name. Not after a rejection ceremony, not after breaking the bond that the moon herself had placed between him and Arya, not after a single private word, no quiet conversation in a corridor, no letter slipped beneath a door, no moment where he had looked Arya in the eye and told her what was coming. He simply stood before 500 wolves and announced another woman as his chosen Luna. The silence that followed was the particular kind that arrives when a room full of people all stop breathing at the same instant. A pup near the back had been laughing at something, some small child's joke, and the laughter cut off mid-sound, like a thread snipped clean. An elder's ceremonial drum missed its beat. Renwick Ashgrove lowered his goblet without drinking from it. Elder Orvin Christmore closed his eyes slowly, the way a man does when he is watching something break that he knew was going to break and still hoped would not. Maelora Vanthorpe, standing on the other side of the platform in a silver gown that had been chosen very deliberately, allowed a practiced, modest smile to move across her face. She had been waiting for this moment. It showed in the way she carried it too smoothly, like a woman who had rehearsed the expression in a mirror and knew exactly which angle of the firelight would catch her best. And then, one by one, every eye in the great hall shifted, not toward Maelora, toward Arya, the woman still standing, the woman not yet gone. Arya did not cry. Wolves are not trained out of tears the way alphas are. But Arya Stonemarrow had a different kind of strength, not the kind that refuses to feel, but the kind that feels everything and still does not let it spill in front of an audience. She did not step forward. She did not reach for the moonstone at her throat, though her fingers knew exactly where it was. She did not make a sound. She simply found Wulfric's eyes across the firelight, and she held them, steady, quiet, heavy with everything she had given this man and this pack for 2 years, without being asked, without being thanked, without being seen. Wulfric looked away first. Inside her chest, something that had been holding on for a long time finally, gently, let go. She set her ceremonial goblet down on the nearest surface, no sound, no drama, and turned to look at Maelora Vanthorpe. Not with anger, not with coldness, with something almost like gentleness, which was somehow worse than either. "I hope you love this pack as much as it deserves." That was all she said. Then she walked out of the great hall. Not hurriedly, not dramatically. She walked the way a woman walks when she has already released a room inside her heart before her feet have finished crossing it, with the unhurried, quiet dignity of someone who knows exactly where she is going, even if no one else does. The great doors closed behind her, and the celebration that restarted in her wake was thin and uncertain, like music being played in a house where everyone can feel that something has just gone wrong, but no one yet knows what it is going to cost them. The healing quarters were at the east end of the Bloodmere stronghold, away from the feast halls and the warrior barracks, tucked into the part of the building where the stone was older, and the windows were small, and the air always smelled faintly of dried herbs, and something warm that could not quite be named. Arya had loved this place from the first week she arrived. It was the one room in the stronghold that had never felt like it belonged to anyone else. She was sitting at her work table, not weeping, not staring at the wall, but working, because work was the one thing she had always known how to do when everything else became impossible, when Elder Orvin Christmore entered without knocking. She had told him long ago, if the matter concerned the pack's survival, he was never to waste time with politeness. He entered without ceremony. He was 83 years old and moved like a man who had long stopped pretending that age was not a weight, but his silver eyes were as sharp as they had ever been. He pulled the chair opposite her, sat, and looked at her for a long moment in the way that only people who have known each other's full truth can look at each other. "Are you well?" he asked. "I am whole," she said. "That will have to be enough for tonight." He nodded. He understood the difference. They sat in quiet for a moment. Outside, faint and far away, the drums of the blood moon ceremony continued the celebration, carrying on without its heart. Orvin reached into the leather case at his side and placed a sealed document on the table between them. The wax bore his mark, the stamp of the Northern Hollow, the oldest neutral territory in the Wolf Lands. Arya looked at it, but did not touch it yet. Instead, she told him something she had told no one else. She told him about the Northern Darkfell border clans, about the peace treaty she had negotiated alone, in 3 quiet meetings that Wulfric had dismissed as unnecessary. While he was occupied entertaining Maelora Vanthorpe at the Vanthorpe estate and learning to enjoy the sound of easy laughter, Arya had sat across a table from Dagon Darkfell, the clan's hard-eyed elder, and she had spoken for 3 hours without raising her voice, and she had come away with a signed accord that kept the northern border peaceful for the next 5 years. Wulfric had never asked how it happened. He had simply noticed, at the next council session, that the northern problem seemed to have resolved itself. He had been grateful in the distracted way of a man who does not look too closely at the mechanism of his own good fortune. Then she told Orvin about the blood sickness. 18 months ago, something had swept through the eastern warrior barracks. 37 wolves had fallen ill warriors, mostly young, the kind Wulfric toasted at feast nights and could not have named alone in private. The pack's healing stores had been low, badly low, because the previous healer had retired without fully restocking and no one had noticed until the sickness arrived. Arya had made a decision in the space of a single night. She had sent a message to her family home in the Stone Marrow Valley, 3 days' ride east, and she had asked for the entire reserve of rare healing herbs her family had been cultivating for 2 generations. Her inheritance. The things her mother had pressed into her hands when she left home and said, "These are yours. Keep them safe." She had sent them all. 37 warriors had recovered. Wulfric had held a celebration in their honor. He had raised his goblet and praised the resilience of the Bloodmere pack. He had not known whose hands had made their survival possible. She had not told him. She had not done it to be told. Orvin was quiet for a long time after she finished. The candles in the healing quarters burned low and warm. Outside, the distant sound of celebration had begun to thin. Did he ever know? Orvin asked. He knew enough to be grateful, Arya said. He simply never wondered why. There was a particular kind of memory that lives not in the mind but somewhere lower in the chest or in the hands. Arya had a memory like that, and it chose this quiet moment to surface. The night the mate bond had first revealed itself between her and Wulfric, they had been standing in this same stronghold, in the corridor outside the Great Hall, after a late council session. He had said something ordinary, something about the next morning's schedule, and then the bond had simply opened between them, the way a window opens in a room that has been closed too long. A rush of warmth, a recognition so complete it was almost frightening. He had looked at her, and the expression on his face had been something she had never seen on a king's face before. Unguarded, almost awed, as though he had been expecting many things in his life, and this was not among them. He had said her name differently that night, quietly, like it meant something. She had loved him from that moment, completely, without condition, not because she chose to. True mates do not choose, but because the moon herself had decided it. And Arya had never been in the habit of arguing with things larger than herself. She kept that memory carefully. Even now, even tonight, Orvin pushed the sealed document closer. 8 months ago, he said. You asked me for something. I want you to understand that I have held it ready since the day you asked. Arya picked up the document now, broke the seal. Read it. It was the Silver Accord, a formal recognition, signed by Elder Orvin Christmore on behalf of the Northern Hollow, granting Arya Stonemarrow the title of Healer Sovereign. It was a title that carried its own authority, its own protection under territorial law, its own future, entirely independent of any Alpha's court. A title that could not be stripped by any king. A title that had been Arya's waiting, sealed, untouched for 8 months. 8 months ago, she had sensed something shifting in Wulfric, some cold distance growing. She had not known then what form it would take. She had only known, in the quiet, careful way she knew most things, that a wise woman builds a door before she needs one. She had not planned to use it. She had only built it because some part of her had known, had always known that the house might not be safe forever. Her hand did not tremble as she held the document. Not very much. Thank you, she said, for keeping it. Thank you, Orvin replied, for trusting me with it. Outside the window, the moon was still red. But the drums had finally gone quiet. Morning came to the Bloodmere stronghold with the particular cruelty of mornings that follow terrible nights. The light, identical to every other morning. The birdsong unchanged. The world proceeding as though it had not watched something irreplaceable break the night before. Maelora Vanthorpe came to breakfast in pale gold silk. She moved through the great dining hall the way a woman moves when she believes she has finally arrived somewhere she was always meant to be. She spoke to the servants with a new authority, not unkind, but the kind of confident that comes from someone who has just been given a title and has not yet learned to carry it quietly. She ran her eyes along the walls of the hall, and there was something in her gaze that was already measuring, already imagining. Wulfric sat at the head of the great table. He had slept poorly. It showed in the line of his jaw and the way he held his goblet, not drinking, just holding, as though the weight of it was useful. Renwick Ashgrove sat to his left, quiet and watchful, the way a good beater always is when he knows his king has done something that cannot be undone. Arya entered at her usual time. She wore grey, simply cut. Her hair was braided back from her face. She looked, to the casual eye, exactly as she always looked, composed, warm, unruffled. Only the people who knew her best would have noticed the slight deliberateness of her posture, the way her warmth this morning was being chosen rather than felt. She was performing steadiness the way other people perform confidence, because if you hold the shape of a thing long enough, sometimes the feeling follows. She took her usual seat, poured her tea. Maylora was the first to speak. "I hope you rested well," she said. The words were careful, deliberately gentle, the kind of gentle that has a point inside it. "Very well," Arya replied. "And you?" "Wonderfully." Maylora glanced around the hall with a small, possessive smile. "Wulfric's home is so beautiful." A pause, timed perfectly. "Our home." Arya stirred her tea once. "It is," she said, "when one does not know what it costs." Wulfric set down his knife. The sound was small in the large room, but it was enough. The servants found sudden, urgent business at the far end of the hall. Maylora tried a different approach. Gracious, generous, the performance of a woman being magnanimous in victory. She spoke about the transition, about what would be best for the pack, for appearances, for the way these things were handled in polite wolf society. She suggested, with great care, that Arya might want to step back gracefully now that the announcement had been made. That the pack, the council, the clans could be forgiving if Arya simply cooperated with what had already been decided. Arya looked at her for a long, considering moment. "Women who ask other women to suffer gracefully," she said, "usually only mean they would prefer the suffering to be quiet." Wulfric's voice dropped. "That is enough." Arya looked at him. Steady. Direct. "Not quite," she said. Then she rose. She thanked them both for breakfast sincerely, which was somehow more unsettling than sarcasm, and she left them sitting at the long table with cold tea and the first real crack running through their certainty. Renwick Ashgrove watched her go. He did not speak, but after a moment he picked up his goblet and set it back down without drinking, and the small motion was enough to tell anyone watching that the beta of the Bloodmere pack had already formed his own opinion about the events of the last 12 hours, and it was not a comfortable one. Wulfric stared at his plate. Maylora began speaking again, something about the council meeting that afternoon, something about the border agreements she would need to review. Her voice was bright and capable and carefully pitched to sound like leadership. Wulfric heard none of it. He was thinking about the look in Arya's eyes at breakfast. The controlled, deliberate warmth of a woman who had chosen not to be broken in public, and beneath it, visible only to someone who had once known her face the way a man knows a place he loves and has spent too long away from something that was not anger and was not grief, but was perhaps the quietest, most devastating form of both. He pushed back his chair. Melora's voice trailed off mid-sentence. He did not explain himself. Alphas rarely do. But he spent the rest of that morning in his study with the door closed, and no counsel admitted, and Beta Renwick told everyone who came to the door that the king was unavailable, and his own face said the rest. By the afternoon of the second day, Maylora had made her first real move. Wulfric had not ordered it, or rather, he had agreed to it, the way a man agrees to things when he has been made to feel that agreement is simply the natural next step, that the path was already laid and he is only being asked to walk it. Maylora had a gift for making decisions feel inevitable. It was one of the things Wulfric had initially admired about her. The document had been prepared by the Van Thorpe family's legal counsel, a formal transfer of Arya's pack privileges, her healing administration, and her territorial alliances to Luna Maylora's authority. It sat on the Bloodmere council table in a neat leather folder, looking entirely reasonable. Wulfric had summoned Arya to the council chamber. She came. Of course she came. Arya Stonemarrow had never in her life refused a summons, not because she felt she had to, but because she did not believe in making things harder than they were. She entered the chamber, looked at the document on the table, and her expression did not change. "This makes the transition cleaner," Wulfric said. He gestured toward the folder. Arya opened it, read it slowly, carefully. She reached the section about the alliance transfers and almost smiled, not the warm smile she usually wore, but something quieter, more internal. "Who told you these alliances were yours to transfer?" she asked. They belong to the pack, Wulfric said. They were built by me, Arya replied. That is not the same thing. Mylora leaned forward from her chair beside Wulfric. It is only a formality, she said. Her tone was smooth. Practiced. Arya looked at her. Who told you that? Wulfric. A small, confident smile. Then you should begin asking better questions, Arya said. Wulfric's voice hardened. He told her to sign the document. He said it with the authority of an Alpha King, which was not nothing it was, in most rooms. The kind of voice that closed arguments the way a door closes, firmly and finally. Arya looked at him. Once, calmly, and she refused. Into the silence that followed, Elder Orvin Christmore entered the council chamber. He moved without hurry. He had been waiting outside because Arya had told him exactly what time the summons was for, and he entered now, carrying his leather case and the particular authority of a man who has outlived 6 Alpha Kings and has learned that patience is simply a form of power most people mistake for weakness. He placed not 1 document but 12 on the council table, in a neat row. Patient as a healer laying out instruments before a procedure that is going to be necessary and difficult and cannot be rushed. Then he began to read them aloud. One by one. The Darkfell Peace Accord, signed 18 months ago by Elder Dagon Darkfell of the Northern Clans and witnessed by Orvin himself, Arya Stonemarrow's name on the signature line. Wulfric Bloodmere's name absent. The blood sickness recovery records. A full medical account of the outbreak in the Eastern Barracks, the source of the healing reserves used, and the name of the person who had provided them at personal cost. Arya Stonemarrow. Her family inheritance. Gone. The Windvale border stabilization. A quiet agreement with the Eastern Windvale Wolves that had kept a potential territorial dispute from becoming a war. Negotiated by Arya during a fortnight when Wulfric had been hosting the Vanthorpe family at the stronghold. And then the 12th document. Orvin paused before reading it. He looked at Mylora Vanthorpe. The Haleborn Alliance dispute, he said. 8 months ago, the Haleborn Wolves, your family's primary trading partners, broke their accord with the Vanthorpe estate over a debt that could not be repaid. The dispute was close to becoming public knowledge throughout the territory, which would have disgraced your family name and reflected badly on the king's court, given the rumored association between you and the Alpha at that time. He set the document on the table. It was resolved quietly. The debt was absorbed. The dispute was ended before it reached any council. And the person who arranged all of that to protect both the Vanthorpe name and the king she served was Arya Stonemarrow. The silence in the council chamber was absolute. Mylora's composure did not shatter, but it fractured at the edges, in the small places where a face cannot be fully controlled. A slight tightening around the eyes, a stillness in the hands that was too deliberate. Her practiced expression had been built for social difficulties. It had not been built for this. The Haleborn dispute, she said. The words were quiet, almost to herself. Your family's name survived it because of Her Grace's intervention, Orvin said. He did not say it unkindly. He simply said it as one states a fact that must be stated. The standing your family still carries in this territory, the respect, the trade relationships, the alliances, she protected all of it. Without being asked, without telling anyone, Wulfric had picked up the 12th document. He was reading it. The expression on his face was not anger. It was something much slower, and much more painful, the expression that belongs to a man who is understanding, for the first time, the actual size of what he has been holding without knowing it. Like reaching into a pocket and finding something precious that you did not remember placing there, and realizing you have come terrifyingly close to losing it without once understanding what it was. What happens if she withdraws? He asked. His voice was quiet. He was not asking as an alpha. He was asking as a man who has just learned he is standing on ground he never built. Orvin closed his case with a small, decisive sound. The Darkfell border accord expires without renewal. The Haleborn debt surfaces publicly. The Windvale arrangement dissolves. The pack survives the season. It may not survive the year. A silence longer than any that had come before. Surely something can be arranged, Maelora said. Her voice was careful. Her eyes were calculating. Surely there are people who could. Something has been arranged, Arya said. She reached into the leather case she had carried in with her and placed the silver accord on the council table. The wax seal was already broken. She had opened it 2 nights ago, alone, in the healing quarters, while the blood moon drums went quiet outside. Wulfric looked at it. He read the title. He read Orvin's signature, and the date 8 months ago, before any of this had begun in front of witnesses, before the ceremony, before the announcement, before he had given Arya a single reason he could point to. She had seen it coming 8 months ago, and she had quietly, without fuss, without accusation, built herself a future that did not depend on his. The candle flames in the council chamber barely moved. No one spoke for a long time. The news moved through the stronghold the way news always does, faster than feet, quieter than drums, reaching every corner before anyone could have logically carried it there. Arya Stonemarrow was departing. In 2 days, she would leave for the Northern Hollow to assume the title of Healer Sovereign. The servant families whose welfare she had quietly protected under a separate accord negotiated and signed 6 months ago, another door she had built before she needed it, would remain under the protections she had established. She had left nothing undone. She had left no one unprotected. Even her departure was an act of care. The pack moved differently that day. Warriors, who had recovered from the blood sickness, found reasons to walk past the healing quarters. Tenant families along the inner courtyard stood in doorways longer than usual when Arya passed. Mrs. Elspeth Cinderwick, the head housekeeper who had served 3 generations of the Bloodmere line and was known to have wept only twice in 40 years of service, he was seen at the far end of the east corridor, with her spine very straight and her eyes very red. Maelora did not notice any of this, or perhaps she noticed and decided it did not matter. It was difficult, with Maelora Vanthorpe, to determine which. She found Arya in the east corridor, near the herb storage rooms, and she came without Wulfric and without her careful public manner. The gracious mask she wore in the great hall was elsewhere today. What replaced it was harder and younger and more honest in the way that exposed things often are. "You did all of this deliberately," Maelora said. Her voice was tight. "Every document, every alliance, you built all of it so you could tear it down in front of him and make him look weak." Arya stopped walking. She turned and regarded Maelora with something that was not anger, something quieter and more careful than anger. Genuine attention. The way a healer looks at a wound to understand its nature before deciding how to treat it. "I built all of it," Arya said, "to keep the pack alive. The difference between us is that you cannot imagine doing something without an audience." Maelora's jaw tightened. She shifted to a different approach, tactical now, the Vanthorpe family's training in negotiation showing through the cracked surface of her composure. "If you leave and the pack suffers, what am I supposed to do?" The question was direct, unguarded. Not, "What happens to Wulfric?" Not, "What happens to our people?" Just herself. Her position. The crown she had wanted badly enough to step into a space she had not earned. Arya looked at her for a moment. "You might begin," she said quietly, "by learning whether the house you intend to rule was ever truly offered to you." She walked away. From the doorway behind Maelora, an adjoining passage she had not known was there. Wulfric stepped back into the shadow of the wall. He had come looking for Arya. He had been standing in that doorway for 2 minutes. He had heard Maelora's question. He stood there for a long time after they had both gone, one departing east and one west, the corridor between them empty and silent. That evening, he went to Maelora. He did not report the conversation. He simply told her, in the careful, controlled voice he used when he had made a decision and needed it to be received cleanly, that he had been wrong. About her. About his understanding of what the lunar role required. About what he had thought he was choosing and what he had actually chosen. He was not unkind about it. He was never unkind when he was being honest. It was one of the few reliable good things about him. My Laura did not cry. She listened. She nodded once, very precisely. And then she left the room. And that evening her trunks were packed, and by dusk her carriage was moving down the Stronghold Road without ceremony, without a farewell, with only a note left on Wulfric's council table, 3 lines, formal, cold, the note of a woman who has decided that retreat is preferable to the indignity of being seen to lose. The pack watched from upper windows. No one cheered. No one mourned. There was only the quiet, collective relief of people watching a storm pass that they had all been waiting for without quite admitting it to each other. Wulfric sat in the great hall for a long time after. Renwick Ashgrove came and sat beside him without speaking. He brought water, not wine, an old pack custom, the drink offered to someone in grief rather than celebration, and that small, wordless gesture said more about the gravity of the evening than any council speech could have. Wulfric held the glass and stared at nothing, and began, for the first time, to understand the full weight of what one night's fear had cost him. He came to her after midnight. The pack was sleeping. The stronghold had settled into the particular quiet that belongs to old stone buildings in the deep hours of the night, the creak of cooling walls, the low sound of the wind finding its way through the courtyard, the distant bark of one of the border scouts checking in on his usual rounds. Wulfric moved through the east corridor alone, without his beta, without ceremony. He was not an alpha king on his way somewhere. He was a man who had spent 3 hours sitting with the full, unguarded truth of himself, and found it very difficult company. The healing quarters were lit. Of course they were. Arya Stonemarrow did not leave bad work behind her. She was at her work table when he appeared in the doorway, organizing the last of her remedy stores into careful rows, correcting a supply ledger so that whoever came after her would have a clear record and not have to struggle for information that should simply be there, waiting, the way everything Arya left behind always was. She heard him. She had the particular awareness of someone who has spent years tending to people who could not always announce their arrivals. She did not turn immediately. She finished the line she was writing. Then she looked up. "You should be sleeping," she said, as though he were one of her patients, as though some part of her could not, even now, even at the very end of everything, stop caring for him. He came into the room. He did not sit. He stood near the window, the way people stand when they are not sure they have the right to make themselves comfortable but cannot bring themselves to leave. He told her the truth. Not a prepared speech. Not the kind of words an alpha king offers at council, shaped and smoothed and chosen for their effect. A broken one, the kind that comes from a man who has been honest with himself first, which is always the harder conversation, and is now trying to carry that honesty somewhere it can be witnessed. He told her that the bond had terrified him, that needing someone so completely, needing her so completely, had felt like standing on the edge of something vast, and knowing that if he fell, there would be nothing left of him that could lead a pack or make a decision or hold his people together. He told her that Maelora had felt safe because she was someone he could afford to lose, someone he had not needed so fully that her absence would hollow him. He stopped. Then, quieter, he had not understood, until this week, what a terrible reason that was to choose a Luna. Arya listened without interrupting. She had the healer's gift for bearing witness, for being present with someone's pain, without trying to redirect it or resolve it before it had finished arriving. When he finished, the room was very quiet. "You cannot protect yourself from love by destroying it, Wulfric," she said at last. "You only end up with the wound, and none of the warmth." He crossed the room. He stood close enough that the mate bond still there, still alive between them, quieter than it had once been but not gone. The way a fire is not gone simply because someone has let it burn low began to hum. Both of them could feel it. The low golden pull that true mate bonds carry. The recognition that goes beneath thought and beneath choice and belongs to something older than either of them. He reached for her hand. She let him hold it, just for a moment. Just long enough for both of them to feel what had always been true between them, the warmth of it, the completeness, the sense of a puzzle piece finally occupying the space it was made for. Then she gently withdrew. "Take care of them," she said. Her voice was very steady. "They are good people. They deserved better than to be a reason." He stayed where he was. Close. Not reaching again. "Is there nothing I can say?" he asked. She almost smiled. Not a small or defeated smile, a real one, the kind that lives in the eyes and belongs to a person who knows who they are even when the world has just tried very hard to make them forget. "There are many things you can say," she told him. "You will think of them for years. That is how regret works. It becomes eloquent too late." He did not argue with that. He did not move to stop her. He did not reach for the bond or her name or any of the 100 things that might have held her another hour, another day. He stood still, in the healing quarters, while the candles burned quietly around them, and he let the truth of the evening settle over him like something heavy and necessary. Arya returned to her work table. He did not leave immediately. He stood at the window for a time, watching her work, the careful hands, the neat handwriting in the ledger, the rows of remedy stores organized with the quiet thoroughness of a woman who loves the people she serves enough to think past her own pain. The moon had moved past the window frame and left the room in warmer firelight. They existed in the same room, in the same silence, for a little while longer, because sometimes the kindest thing two people can offer each other at the end of something real is simply not to rush the goodbye. When he finally moved toward the door, she did not call after him. He paused once, with his back to her, hand on the doorframe. He wanted to say something more. Something that would reach across the space between what he had done and what he had always meant. Something that would matter. But some distances cannot be crossed with words. And Wulfric Bloodmere, who had spent his life commanding rooms, walked out of this one in silence, because it was the only honest thing left to offer her. Dawn arrived the way it always does, without asking anyone's permission. Arya descended the steps of the Bloodmere stronghold in a deep blue traveling cloak. Her trunk had been brought down the night before by 2 of the house staff who had insisted on carrying it themselves, and who had done so without being asked and without being thanked for it, which is the way the best kinds of kindness move without announcement, without needing one. The moonstone pendant was not at her throat. She had left it on Wulfric's council table during the night, beside the supply ledger she had corrected for the pack's records. No note, no explanation. He would understand, eventually. The pendant had been a symbol of the bond of the night it first revealed itself between them, and she was not taking it, because she was not taking the grief with her. She was leaving it where it belonged, with the person who had needed to learn its value. Elder Orvin Christmore stood beside the carriage. He had come without ceremony, as was his way. No formal robes this morning, only his traveling coat and his leather case, and the expression of a man who is sad about the shape of things and has decided that sadness is not a reason to be absent. Mrs. Elspeth Cinderwick stood in the doorway of the stronghold with her red eyes and her straight spine, because she had decided very firmly that she would not embarrass herself and had managed only the spine part. Along the inner corridor, the pack's servant families had gathered, not dramatically, not in a formal farewell line, simply there appearing in doorways and along the walls of the passage, the way people appear when someone who mattered is leaving, and they have no words large enough for it. Some of the tenant families had brought small things, a sprig of dried herb, a folded cloth, a child pressing a smooth stone into Arya's hand as she passed, because children offer what they have, and what they had was a stone they had thought was beautiful. She accepted all of it. She stopped where she needed to stop, and she held the hands that reached for hers, and she said the names she had learned, all of them, every servant, every child, every warrior who had recovered in the East Barracks and stood now in the corridor with his chin held carefully level, because Arya Stonemarrow had always known that the people who run a place are as much its heart as the people who rule it. When she stepped out of the main doors and into the cool morning air, the carriage was waiting. Orvin held the door. She paused for one breath, just one, and looked up at the stronghold, at the stone that had been her home for 2 years, at the banners hanging from the upper walls that caught the early wind and moved with it, alive and ancient and entirely unaware of small human heartbreaks. She had imagined this moment many times in the past 8 months, the private imagining of a woman who prepares for possibilities she hopes will not arrive. She had imagined it would feel like tearing, like leaving a part of herself behind, like the particular violence of detachment. Instead, it felt like setting down something heavy that she had carried so long she had forgotten it was not part of her own body. The weight of holding everything together for a man who had never learned to see it. The carriage door was open. She turned and Wulfric was at the top of the steps. He had not been there a moment ago. He had come without being announced, without ceremony, without his better beside him. He wore no formal armor, only the plain dark clothing of a man who had not slept and had stopped caring what that looked like. His eyes found her the moment he appeared, the way eyes do when they have been looking for something without admitting it. He looked at her the way he should have looked years ago, the way the bond had always asked him to look. The way a man looks at something he finally understands is the most important thing in whatever space separates them. He did not call her name immediately. He simply looked, as though he wanted to carry the image of her clearly standing in morning light, in a blue traveling cloak, with her chin up and her hands still and the particular quiet around her that had always been her signature, the stillness of a woman who has never needed noise to fill the space she occupies. She looked back at him. Then she stepped into the carriage, and the door was almost closed, and the window was open, and he moved. He came down 3 steps. Not all the way, just enough. "Arya," he said. She held the window frame. Her eyes found his. The stronghold rose behind him, all that stone, all that history, the banners, and the walls, and the old drums, and the great hall where 500 people had watched him say another woman's name 3 nights ago. The kingdom she had held together from the shadows while he stood at its center, dazzled and distracted, and entirely unaware of the hands beneath his feet. "I should have seen you," he said. The words were simple. They were the only ones, in the end, that mattered. She held his gaze for a long, quiet moment. Long enough for the bond to hum one final time between them, golden, aching, entirely certain of what it had always known, and for both of them to feel it. "Yes," she said. "You should have." The carriage moved. Wulfric stood at the top of the steps and watched it go. He stood there until it had passed through the stronghold gates and turned onto the road north, and for a little while after that too, watching the space where it had been, because some departures leave an outline behind them that takes time to disappear. Renwick appeared at his shoulder. He said nothing. Good betas rarely need to. The morning continued. This is the thing that never changes. The morning always continues. The warriors went to the training grounds. The tenant families began their work in the fields and the kitchens and the storerooms. Children who had been too young to understand what the past 3 days meant ran through the inner courtyard with the unself-conscious freedom of the very young, alive and moving, and leaving small footprints in the morning frost. All of it ordinary, all of it breathing, all of it standing on ground that Arya Stonemarrow had laid, without being asked, without being seen, without being thanked. The Darkfell border was still peaceful. The warriors recovered from the blood sickness were still alive. The accords were still signed, still holding, still protecting the people they had been built to protect. That was the last gift she had left behind. Not the pendant, not the ledger, not the 12 documents on the council table. The last gift was the peace itself, the living, ordinary-looking peace of a pack that had been loved into stability by a woman it was only now learning to miss. By noon, everyone in the territory knew Maelora Vanthorpe had left Bloodmere. By nightfall, everyone knew Arya was gone too. What no one yet knew was which loss would be felt longest. Wulfric Bloodmere knew. He had known it since midnight, when he had stood in the healing quarters with a woman's hand in his and felt the full measure of what the bond between true mates carries, the warmth, the completion, the sense of being, for the first time in a long time, exactly where you are supposed to be, and had understood, in the same breath, that he had done this to himself. That is the specific weight of regret that belongs to people who are capable of finally seeing clearly. It does not make them lesser. It makes them, for the first time, honest. And somewhere north of the Bloodmere territory, on a road that wound through the quieter lands toward the northern hollow, a carriage moved through the morning light, with Elder Orvin Christmore reading a territorial map on one side, and Arya Stonemarrow looking out the window on the other. She was not weeping. She was not performing composure. She was simply watching the land go by the pines, the frost on the grass, the pale light coming through the trees in long slanted columns, and thinking about the life that was waiting for her. The Healer Sovereign's seat in the northern hollow. The work that needed doing. The people she had not yet met who would someday stand in her doorway without knocking because she would have told them long ago, if the matter is important, never waste time with politeness. She had always known who she was. She was the woman who built the peace, who healed the sick, who held the alliances together with quiet, patient, invisible hands. She was the woman who had loved a king well enough to save his kingdom, and wisely enough to know when it was time to save herself. The road north was long. The morning was very clear. And Arya Stonemarrow, Healer Sovereign, true mate of the Bloodmere Alpha King, builder of peace between clans and keeper of 1,000 quiet kindnesses that had never been counted, turned her face toward the light and let it find her. Some people learn what they had only after it is gone. Some lessons arrive early enough to matter, and some bonds forged by the moon herself, tested by one man's fear and one woman's grace, are strong enough to survive even the mistakes made against them. Whether Wulfric Bloodmere had the time and the courage to learn the difference is a story for another night. But tonight, this story belonged to her.